Go. Welcome to Inspirational Leadership. I'm your host, Kristen Harcourt, and we have another fabulous guest. So, life is too short to work in a soul-sucking workplace, and that's why Michael's on a mission to turbocharge inspiring, happy, and humane workplace cultures that drive extraordinary results. Canadian speaking Hall of Fame inductee Michael Kerr is an international business speaker, very funny motivational speaker. It's true, I've seen him, and workshop trainer. He's also the author of 9 books. For more than 25 years, Michael has traveled the world researching, writing, and speaking about inspiring workplace cultures, inspiring leaders, and businesses that leverage their humor resources to drive outrageous results for their employees and their customers. Michael has delivered his captivating keynote presentations and training workshops to more than 3,000 audiences from Austria to Australia, from Boston to Bermuda, from Cleveland to Calgary. Michael lives in Canmore, Alberta, 1 hour west of Calgary in the inspiring Canadian Rockies. Welcome to the show, Michael.
Thank you, Kristen. It is fabulous to be here. Thank you for that introduction.
Uh, my pleasure. So like 9 books, like not too many books or anything, Michael. Like you've got all this time in your hands with all these 9 books, right? Like that's amazing.
Thank you. I actually have a funny story about that. I was speaking a while ago, and
Yes,
this woman, the client, was introducing me, and she's up on stage, and I'm standing up facing the audience, and she's
yes,
reading my introduction.
yes.
And when she gets to the part about 9 books, she actually stops and
Yeah.
looks at me and goes, "You stopped at 9? Like, why not 10, you slacker? What's wrong with you?"
I mean, amazing. And so just let us know, what is your most recent book? I think you said that you just released one, was it last year? What's your most recent? Oh, there we
I
go.
just happen to have it handy.
Yes.
It's right here. It is called Small Moments, Big Outcomes: How Leaders Create Cultures That Fuel Extraordinary Results.
Mm. I mean, so everyone listening right now, we know that Michael is our kind of guy because it's called Inspirational Leadership, the name of the podcast. So, Michael, you're in the right place. But we want everyone to get a chance to, first of all, hear a little bit more about you and your story. So, you can start us anywhere. Some people start back in childhood as the 3-year-old, but you start wherever you want, Michael. But we want to know more about your story and like really what got you so passionate about this work you're doing in the world.
Well, I was born in a small town in southern British Columbia. I won't go that far back. So in my early years, I was a senior manager in an organization that shall remain nameless. I was a communication manager
Yes.
and loved the job until the workplace culture became this soul-sucking, fun-sucking workplace. And by the way, I've learned the hard way during my talks. You have to be very careful when you say the phrase fun-sucking.
Yes.
So it
Yes.
became this fun-sucking, horrific workplace culture that was sucking the life out of not just me, a lot of my friends and my colleagues. And I realized I had to do something else with my life because I did a lot of speaking and training in that role. I knew I was good at it. I knew I loved it. I knew I was passionate about it. And so I decided to quit that job, vote myself off the island, essentially, and decide to try my hand at this thing called professional speaking. And that's why I made it my mission to talk about how work should not be sucking the life out of you, that work should be giving us energy. It should be fueling us energy. I mean, what a crazy concept to think we would actually feel better at the end of a workday having put in our time at work instead of feeling depleted and exhausted and stressed and burnt out and de-energized. And a lot of that, exactly what you, I know, speak about so passionately, a lot of that was centered around just the lack of humanity that I saw going
Mhm.
on in this very
Mhm.
soul-sucking workplace. And so I
Mhm.
wanted to talk about putting people front and center in any workplace. And I especially focused on humor and continue to, because I was known for my sense of humor. I was known for my sense of
Mhm.
humor as a manager. I
Mhm.
I realized, I don't think until after I left, I
Mm.
realized the impact that humor could have on the workplace, and that the lack of humor was having on our workplace when the culture became so dysfunctional and toxic. So I started researching humor. I started researching the benefits of humor in a workplace culture. And
Hmm.
so that's how I got down this crazy road. And now it's been more than, I don't know, it's getting close to 30 years.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's been my experience as well in terms of a lot of times where I think we're so passionate about what that can be in terms of the contrast with being in a really soul sucking, because I had some soul sucking leaders my first couple of organizations out of school. And you just start to think, oh, maybe this is just how it is. Like maybe I had
Right.
these expectations that were
Right.
unrealistic. But then you have it contrasted with amazing workplaces, phenomenal leaders, and you realize, oh my gosh, this is what it should look like.
Totally. This is how it could be and should be, right? And it's so inspiring to see these stories. And I know even in the early years when I started interviewing leaders and going into businesses to learn about what they were doing to make these more humane, incredible workplaces, I realized, I always thought of myself, as I'm sure everybody does,
Right.
as a pretty good leader. I thought I was a very good leader.
Yeah.
But boy, I learned so much. And I thought, wow, like I would have done so many things different if I had just known what
Right.
was possible and known some of these
Right.
just sometimes simple practices to just build a more humane workplace.
Absolutely. So let's start there. I want to look at it from both angles. I want to look at it from the organizational angle and then look at the individual as a leader. And when I talk about leaders on this podcast, we're all leaders. You don't have to have the
Right.
leader as a title or have that in terms of being a manager. I think every day we have an opportunity to show up as leaders. And I also am so excited to hear more about humor and laughter and all of the stats and data around that. Let's start with, you started to talk to some of these inspiring leaders and did your interviews, and you started to realize like, oh, here are some gaps that I had in leadership. And someone you probably were quite self-aware and were working on yourself, but still didn't realize. What did you start to notice in terms of some of those gaps, both for yourself and then what you see in organizations when it comes to leadership?
I think more than anything, it was just the simple need, and I guess it sounds simple on the surface, but the need to just be more intentional as a leader, as
Yeah.
opposed to being a manager. And as you say, and I talk about this all the time too, right? Everybody has the potential to be a leader. There's a difference between being an employee and being a leader. There's a difference between being a manager and being a leader. Not that we don't need good managers. Some
Yeah.
of my best friends are managers,
Yeah.
but there is a difference. And I'm just being more intentional about what that means to truly be a leader and connect with my employees even better and more intentionally. So simple things like the power of doing regular check-in conversations with
Hmm.
employees, which
Hmm.
there's so much research around, and so many of the leaders I've interviewed rave about the impact of those. So something just even that simple, I certainly would have put into practice.
Yeah, I think I really love, and like you said, it sounds simple, but actually it's not, because when it comes to intentionality, how often the intentionality could be sometimes around the numbers and hitting business outcomes and making sure you're hitting deliverables. But when it comes to taking a step back, I've noticed with so many of the leaders I've coached over the years, they realize I haven't actually even taken a step back and asked myself, who do I want to be as a leader? How do I want to show up every day? What is that impact I want to make? What does it look like for me to continue to up level when it comes to the people leadership piece? Some realize they never even actually asked themselves that question. So how can there be an intentionality where the question hasn't even been asked?
Yes, totally, right. And what the question I ask all the time is, what legacy do you want to leave as a leader,
Right.
right? What legacy are you building day in and day out?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So now bring us over to the humor piece, because it's funny. So when I go into organizations and they're new organizations I'm working with, I start to get a feel for the culture as soon as I walk in that door
Oh
based
yeah.
on the energy, right? Do I hear laughter? Do I hear shouting? Do I hear shouting in a positive way? So not screaming, but when I start to notice that energy, and I always find the organizations I love working with the most, I do hear that laughter and I hear this spark of energy around it, where sometimes others, it's either silence and you can just, it's deafening as you walk into that building, the energy of the room. So tell me more about this, about humor and its impact.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great starting point right there because you can sense the mojo in a workplace, right? As I sometimes call it, whether it has this somber feeling. So right there, it is like the canary in the coal mine thing, laughter is and humor is. It's a great indicator. It's a green flag that this is a great, positive, humane workplace if people feel comfortable enough to laugh and share their sense of humor and be human. So I talk about how humor, how positive humor, of course, humor that
Yeah.
laughs with people,
Yeah.
humor that is constructive and supportive and puts people first, how that kind of humor can help build a more inspiring, humane workplace culture, but also, as we just said, reflects a more positive, humane workplace culture where we're doing the right thing. So it becomes easy for everyone to bring their sense of humor along for the ride. But we know humor is, I think, one of the most undervalued, underappreciated, underutilized resources we have at our disposal. We know it can lead to, when we infuse it into our culture, to lower employee turnover rates, lower absenteeism rates, more productivity, better collaboration, better communication, more creativity and innovation.
Mhm.
It's a great way to manage stress and be more resilient. It's a way to stand out with your customer experience. So it has all of these multiple benefits if we just think about ways we can intentionally apply it. And even if we don't think about ways of intentionally implying it, of putting humor to work on purpose, as I say,
Mhm.
uh, at least building the kind of culture where you aren't stepping on the humor, right? Where you aren't squashing it or coming down on people for having a little bit of fun and just being themselves. So it's about creating that more open, honest, authentic environment.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember being in a training actually not that long ago, a couple of months ago, and one of the female leaders who was really working her way up the corporate ladder, she noticed that there was a part of her that, and a woman from a marginalized group as well. And so she felt like there was this pressure around this certain way she had to be when she was in meetings or when she was around her team. And she realized as we were having more conversations around authenticity, there's a part of her that actually longed to bring in some other parts of herself into these meetings, right? And so she actually got to by the end of our session, she said she was going to challenge herself to intentionally bring in some more humor and do some jokes at the beginning of her sessions. But I really want to acknowledge like where that was coming from. She really felt this pressure that as a marginalized female, that she won't be taken as seriously if she were to somehow do this part, but then also realize how she was showing up inauthentic, which is also quite exhausting.
Oh, totally. It is so exhausting to feel like we have to put on a mask and not be ourselves, right? And that's why some of the most important conversations we can have at work is around that, and it's such a hot topic these days, that sense of belonging, where you
Yeah.
truly feel like you don't have to change yourself to fit in. You can bring your authentic self to work. And in fact, Kristen, when I've interviewed people about why they like this particular workplace more than any other workplace they've had in their lives, one of the things they say to me time and time again is, this is
Yeah.
the first place where I feel like I
Mhm.
can really be myself and bring my true personality to work with me. I don't feel like I have to talk in a weird way or act in a different way that's not comfortable for me. So that is so important.
Yeah. So, if there are some leaders who are listening and they're saying to themselves, I want to create more space for bringing humor into work, and they're asking themselves, like, what could I do to model that? But maybe not like you. I mean, if people heard Michael speaking on stage, he's hilarious. And then he brings the humor from so many different angles. And that's just naturally who you are, like you just being yourself. But there might be others who they just notice they want to do more of it, but it might not. And it's not that it's inauthentic that they're not doing it. They just are like, ooh, it's kind of like getting a little bit of my comfort zone.
Right.
What would the invitation look like for some of those people who are they're curious and they want to experiment a little bit more with that?
Yeah, and you raise a really good point, because the last thing you want to do is be inauthentic and try to force humor because it's gonna you're gonna look like Michael Scott on the sitcom The Office if you do that, right? If you try to be
Yes.
funny. So I want to remind everybody that bringing your sense of humor to work is not about telling jokes or being a stand-up comedian, and it's not even always about being overtly funny. It's about just being more human, more real, more authentic, about laughing at the things that you have no control over, and especially as a leader, especially learning to laugh at yourselves more.
Yes.
Is it not a truism, after all, that the more seriously a person takes themselves, the less seriously we tend to take that person?
Right.
So if you send the signal that you can laugh at yourself, that does so much in terms of impacting the culture. Remember, as a leader, you are like an orchestra conductor. You are highly contagious with your behaviors and attitudes and emotions. So think about the
Mhm.
mood you want to set.
Mhm.
And in terms of critical touch points, I would suggest look for opportunities in your meetings for sure. That is a great place to send a message about your culture and humor. Meetings should help build your intended culture. They're a critical checkpoint for that, touch point for that, and they should reflect your culture. So make sure your meetings are not these stifling, overly serious events that people dread going to. In fact, if people are dreading going to your meetings, you're doing them wrong. Even a Scientific American study found, amongst many, that the most effective meetings are meetings that have a lot of fun in them, bantering, joking around. People are more honest, they tend to speak up more, they're more creative. So make
Mhm.
sure you build in some things into your meetings that sends that signal. That's a really effective touch point to introduce more humor. Another thing you can do, and it's about infusing it in the culture, so not just your own personal leadership style, but look
Mhm.
for opportunities like giving out some fun recognition rewards that are just
Mhm.
plain silly and goofy. Because again, it's about the message these things send as well. That hey, we don't
Mhm.
take ourselves too seriously here, because we're giving out a jackass whisperer award to whoever has the ability to calm down an upset customer who's really irate, or the Houdini award for somebody who magically made a big problem disappear, or least likely to be voted off the island, or the most likely to be a pirate award. Just some silly awards, right? And again, it's not just the rewards itself, it's the message behind doing that. It sends the message that,
Mhm.
hey, we can have a little fun here, we're not taking ourselves so seriously.
I love those ideas because I think everybody at their core is naturally creative and it's giving them opportunities to harness that. And we get into this, we're in business and we're adulting and we
Yeah.
have to be in adult mode and everything's so
Yep.
serious as adults. And I think sometimes and there's going to be people who are listening to this. I always can feel my audience. You're kind of like, well, no, we have to, but actually it feels counterintuitive, but it actually has the opposite impact because when you start to be able to create this environment where you are bringing some fun and playfulness into the meetings, then people now show up differently because there's more trust, there's more
Totally.
connection, there's more sense of belonging. And guess what? So now, what might have been a more contentious meeting on whatever subject, you start to take away some of that tension. There's a different level of understanding and relationship building and all of this stuff. So I get where sometimes people it feels counterintuitive and there's some skepticism in it.
Right.
But I can confidently say with what you're saying, Michael, that I've always, every single time, I've seen the opposite byproduct, not what people
Yeah.
might think.
Totally. It's not about taking your work lightly, right? It's not about
Yes.
taking your business lightly. It's about taking yourselves lightly. And I'm so glad you mentioned trust, because there is research that says too that when we practice, especially as a leader, a healthy sense of humor, we tend to trust those leaders more because they come across more real.
Yes, exactly, because they are valuable. Like they are
Yeah.
all human. It's not like a CEO doesn't have issues and problems and whatever they are in the organization, whatever that role is. I always used to say that when people would say like, oh, like Oprah or all these famous people, I'm like, Oprah still has challenges and problems, just like all of us. Like we don't get to this level where all of a sudden we skip the human condition.
Right,
And
right.
I think it's almost like this belief that to say what you said as well in terms of feeling like you need to put a mask on and there's this certain persona, it does exactly the opposite. It creates disconnection because how could we connect to that humanity?
Right, right. And you reminded me there of I talk about this in my book, Sarah Blakely, the
Yeah,
the,
I
the
love
former
Sarah.
CEO of
Yeah.
Spanx, and
Yes.
she used to do these oops dance parties where if she screwed up,
Yeah.
she would pick out a song that was kind
Yeah.
of evocative of her screw up and then
Yeah.
share it with everyone. And think of the message that sends. And they'd all
Yeah.
dance. And so it created this vulnerability with her,
Hmm.
this approachability with her,
Hmm.
and it made it safe for people to admit their own mistakes instead of
Hmm.
sweeping them under the rug. So it created that psychological safety that is so important in work.
Well, exactly. And that points to where we hear a lot about organizations talking about like, we believe in innovation. We want innovation. It's like, okay, great. So you understand there's going to be mistakes and
Yeah.
failures and iterations and like, oh, well, kind of like,
You
well,
didn't
you
tell
need
us
to
there were
be
going
able
to be
to, yeah,
mistakes.
yeah, like, well, kind of like little mistakes is like, yeah, but that gets to the next iteration. And we see, I mean, of course, companies constantly through those errors, whether it's a mistake that you get to another iteration, but even as the leader, the growth, I'm sure Sarah would say, like, okay, yeah, that happened. And look how I've grown and learned and what I might do differently from that situation.
Right.
But I like what you're saying there too. It's welcoming others so that they're not feeling like they have to hide
Yeah.
these mistakes, which we know how costly those can be because later on you find out information that you didn't know. And the more that we can create this openness and transparency, then solutions can come up that maybe you weren't able to see because we're having honest dialogues.
Exactly. Exactly. Hey, wait, I'm gonna grab something. I'll be right back. Don't go away, anybody. I'll be right back.
Oh, this is so
On
Michael. I love it. He's like
on
in the
this note, on
moment.
this note, back in the day, we
Yeah,
used to have when I was a manager in this organization, we used to
yeah,
have the official Bonehead Play of the Month
love
award.
it.
So we did this on a Friday afternoon. It never took more than 10 minutes.
Yeah,
So here's how it worked.
yes,
Now, you couldn't nominate each other for the Bonehead Play because that
yeah,
doesn't build the old team spirit. You had to nominate yourself and
yeah,
say, you know what, yeah, I did something really stupid or embarrassing, something that caused you stress.
yes,
And then we had a little presentation. Sometimes there'd be five of us. Often there
yeah.
would just be me. And I would say, here's the bonehead thing I did. And you would get a small reward for having done something that cost you stress. So it was just a fun way to deal with those bloopers, those
Natural.
blunders, those
Yeah,
bonehead things we all do as
yeah,
humans,
yeah.
and to create that environment for people to feel safe to speak up.
Yeah, and for people who are listening on audio, it was so like Michael actually had this bone that went on his head that was hilarious. Go watch the YouTube video that's also available to see it. But such a great example too, right? It's so disarming, right? Like so
Yeah.
disarming when we start to see people show up like that. So you've been doing this work for so long, and so you've had an opportunity to really see this go put into play. So maybe people have heard your keynote or been part of your training, and then they come back and say, "Oh my gosh, Michael, this is where we were. This is where we are now. These are some of the things that have changed in our organization through hearing all of this." Tell me, I know you've got so many of these wonderful stories. So tell me some of those stories around where you just got to see some of this transformation.
Yeah, and that is the most wonderful thing about this business, isn't it? When you hear back from clients, from audience members saying, "Holy smokes, the impact that this had, the impact of the ideas," right? And I'm just a conduit for these amazing ideas, right? So it's not about me, but I just love sharing these brilliant, inspiring, creative ideas and seeing people get excited about them. So one recent example, I've done a fair bit of work with this one big insurance company. And they had me back the following year, full day workshop, talking about all this stuff we're talking about here. And they opened up by sharing, they had a slideshow of
Mhm.
all the things that their branches had done in Western Canada because of what we talked about in terms of culture. So all the things they did to bring more fun to their clients, more fun to their employees, to create these traditions and rituals, because I talk a lot about the importance of that, and things to be more intentional as leaders and more intentional with their culture. So it's amazing to see that impact, and then to see the results, especially when they track it, right? When they track the results in terms of customer engagement scores or employee engagement scores, and you hear the phenomenal shift that can take place sometimes in a
Mhm.
remarkably short time. I think a lot of people
Mhm.
think, oh, it's it's impossible to change an organization. It takes years and years. But when you're intentional about doing some of this
Mhm.
stuff and you just start doing it and you truly
Mhm.
believe in it, the
Mhm.
results can happen surprisingly fast.
Mm, I love that. And I'm curious for that example. I'm hoping that you will tell me that this was also being modeled at the top. So this wasn't just individuals, but we saw all levels of the organization now getting in and modeling this behavior.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it's so important, right? It's so important that it starts at the top, and that employees see that it starts at the top, that it's visible.
Yeah, because my experience is, and I'm sure you've seen this, Michael, where we go at the front of a company and there's this beautiful vision and
Oh,
mission and values, and this is what we're all about. And then I might talk to some employees and like, tell me about these values and how they play out. They're like, oh, yeah, those values. Yeah, I mean, I see the opposite of those behaviors every day.
right.
And the impact, because I actually find that's even worse. Like, I'd rather you just not have the values at the front
Ah,
of your office like that.
yes, I'm so glad you say. I say the exact same thing. Better to have no values than to trumpet your values and then do the opposite or not live up to them, because all you're doing is creating mistrust and creating cynical employees.
Yes.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. Get rid of
Yeah.
your values, because these
Yeah.
you're just paying lip service to these
Yeah.
things. They're just slogans. You're not
Yeah.
you're not treating them as lines in the sand.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. And what a missed wasted opportunity,
yeah,
right? Like if we
yeah.
could just start to see what and again, I think that people are okay with we talked about failure today, and you're not going to always get it right. You're not going to do it
Right.
perfectly, but it's the effort and starting to work in that direction and even just be valuable and say, you know what, I'm going to make mistakes some now, and I did make a mistake here, and let me do the repair. Let me apologize for how I showed up in this situation, or how I could have done things differently, or how I created the environment in that meeting where there wasn't openness for fun and play to come into it, and that's okay too. Like I think people actually have more trust when you're honest and just recognize that, yeah, we're all on this journey.
Yeah, totally, totally. And my hope would be that that is actually reflective of one of your values, to be open when you make a mistake, right? And say,
Yes.
we screwed up here. We tried to live up to our value here, and we realized we didn't. And we're going to apologize, and here's what we're going to do different.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're in the year 2025 and we think about everything that's going on. I know, how'd that happen?
When did this happen? What?
It's a new announcement I wanted to make to you, Michael, in
What?
case you weren't aware. We are now
I
in
am shocked.
2025.
I I I I honestly have no concept of time anymore. It's
I
crazy.
know. I sometimes I don't even know what day it is. So when we start to think about everything that's going on in the world, right? Everything that's going on in the world globally and in our organizations, because this podcast is all about still recognizing ultimately we're all humans.
Yeah.
And so if you start to think about everything that's going on in the world, and I'm going to give you a magic wand. And without that magic wand, yes, you get to use that magic wand and start to make some changes. And this could be, of course, within the workplace, but also what you'd like to see in terms of globally. What do you want to do with that magic wand? What do you think are the strong, like top priorities and opportunities where we can really focus our change right now?
I think, and I don't want this to sound like it's just fluff or lip service, but again, it goes back to making sure your number one value is putting people first, putting your people first. And for the people watching or listening this that maybe work in a large organization, recognize, okay, you're maybe not going to change your entire company, your entire organization, but what can you do with your sphere of influence, your small team, to put humanity first, to put people first? And as you say, there's a lot of stuff going on in the world these days. There's a lot of stress. There is so much change going on. So we need to double down, triple down, nay, quadruple down on our humanity, on our empathy, on our compassion, on our patience with one another, and give
Mhm.
each other space for making mistakes and being human, and being more vulnerable, because these are challenging times for a lot of people. In fact, I just posted a survey the other day that was
Mhm.
in Forbes magazine, talking about the percentage of employees that are crying at work every day because of what's going on in the world. Let's make sure we are doing our part to lead with humanity and heart and put our people first and put our people first, and not at the expense of profits, not at the expense of other things that we sometimes do. And I get it, right? We all get busy, we get stressed out, and we sometimes forget to slow down and forget what the real priorities have to be when you're building an effective organization. And the nice synergy in all of this is the things that we do to create a more humane, compassionate, human-centered workplace also
Mhm.
happen to be the things we need to do to drive real business results, to drive financial results. So don't think that these things are at odds with your financial bottom line. This
Yeah.
is the only bottom line that really matters. And I tell people this, or I remind people of this often in my talks, is,
Yeah.
life is going by really fast. In Canada, in North America, we're given about 4,000 weeks in this
Right.
journey called life, which doesn't sound a lot when you put it into
No,
weeks, right? Because weeks
no.
go by very fast. This week is
Yeah.
going by ridiculously fast.
Yeah.
And then here comes another, and here comes another, and pretty soon we're planning our funeral, right?
Yeah.
So I want to remind people, none of us, when we're sitting on the rocking chair at 97 years old, reflecting back on our work days, I
Mm.
don't think any of us are going to say to ourselves, if I had to do it all over again, I'd take myself more seriously. I'd be more of a soul sucker. I'd be more of a fun sucker. I'd make more people miserable around me.
Right.
None of you are going to think that. None of us are going to think that.
Yeah.
So remember that life is made up of just these small moments, and it is the small moments at work that you have the opportunity to make a difference, to share compassion, to share empathy with someone, and to truly leave a legacy, a
Yeah.
positive, humane legacy.
Oh, so beautifully said, I think. And I really hope someone listening right now it might help to shift a perspective because I think it's hard. Like you get into the weeds, you get into
Oh,
survival mode, and then you lose focus of what truly matters. And I think in times like this, where there is so much turmoil, it's very easy for people to go back to that reactive survival instincts and then make very short-sighted decisions that are going to have a lot of really, really lots of challenges for the people that they make those decisions. And this goes in a lot of different areas, whether that's about downsizing,
absolutely.
whether that's around, oh, we don't care about development now, whether that's not being conscious of that one-on-one conversation that you're having with that other human in front of you. And I like what you said there in terms of slowing down. I've always said slow down to speed up, right? Slow
Yeah.
down to speed
Yeah,
up,
I
right?
love
Like
that.
take your time and which goes back to what you said at the beginning, it allows you to have that intentionality. You know, if I were to go back a week, a month, a year from now, would I have done things differently? Like, what would future me say? And then be
Right.
able to say, like, how do I want to really be intentional about this conversation? And, for all the CEOs listening, and I know there's many, many HR executives who are at the table having these conversations, it does. Like all the data supports when you create these kind of environments, it does impact sales and business outcomes. Like there's no data that says like, oh, that all of a sudden
Yeah.
you don't care. Like, of course, there's accountability here and ownership. It's not just like, oh, it's a fun work environment and there is no accountability. Of course, but people are naturally taking self-accountability because you're creating an environment where they thrive and they want to show up as their best selves.
Right. Yes. Yes. Totally. And I'm glad you said that, Kristen, because it's so true. Some of the most humane, people-centered, family-focused, fun workplace cultures I've gone into with my research, they also happen to be the cultures that have high standards for their employees, that have high levels of accountability. Those two are not opposing, those two principles
Yeah,
aren't in opposition of one another. You can do both. Hold people highly
exactly.
accountable, hold your organization accountable.
Yeah.
In fact, you have to hold your leaders accountable,
Yeah.
but also still build a fun, humane culture.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think some people have this belief that it's somehow mutually exclusive. Like,
No.
oh, if we have this, then we're not a type of company that strives for excellence. And
Right.
I find exactly the opposite, that
Right.
actually creates an environment that breeds high performers wanting to show up and do their best work in service of. So absolutely, I think that's a really, really important point you're making there. Tell me, the name of the show is Inspirational Leadership. Who
Yes.
was somebody that was an inspiring leader for you that's really left a long-term impact on you and how you show up in the world?
Wow. Good question. I'm trying to think of a personal example. I certainly know within my speaking community, I've had some wonderful mentors over the years that have had a huge impact on me in terms of just how they presented themselves. But I'm going to weasel a little bit because I don't if I name a name and people are
Yeah.
listening who
Yeah.
then I'm going to forget some names and then they'll feel bad
You
because I
can just
didn't
say
mention.
overarching what
Yes,
made them
overarching many
inspiring.
people in the, but in terms of and this is what I love, just some of the leaders that I have met, um in my work, in my research. There are so many great ones, like Mike Easton comes to mind, CEO and president of Argus Industries in Winnipeg, who just has such a big heart and this
Mm,
this wonderful ability to frame things, and very intentional as a leader, very intentional about building what he calls a one team culture.
right.
And he talks about how, and I love the framing, and I'm not going to get it quite right, but he talks about this whole idea of making sure you're hiring and supporting your employees
Yeah.
so that there are multiple brains in your company, because we want diverse perspectives, we want diverse ideas, but one
Yeah.
heart, multiple brains.
Yeah.
Is that a Phil Collins song? I feel like I'm
I
going
know.
towards a Phil
I
Collins
know. It
song.
felt like a song. A song was coming.
So people like that just are, I find, so inspiring because they're
Mm,
so compassionate about their
hmm
people, and the
mm,
way he talks about his people is so
hmm
moving. And you sadly don't often see that, the care that he puts into the families of employees out
Yeah.
there. Another one that I love, and this always sticks with me, is
Yeah.
Paul Spiegelman from Beryl Health Call Centers, the CEO, and they have this ridiculously fun workplace culture, family focused,
Mm,
and an insanely low turnover rate within
mm,
the call center business, which is
hmm
unheard of. And I was
hmm
talking to him. I interviewed him. I did a video with him. In fact, interviewed him, and I said, "So, what was the light bulb moment for you to create this ridiculously fun, humane workplace culture?" And he
Yeah.
laughed when he asked the question. And he said,
Yeah.
I get asked this question a lot. And to
Yeah.
be honest, there was no light bulb moment. I didn't realize that this was different than what most businesses do. He just didn't know any better. He didn't know any better than to create this
That's just,
incredible workplace culture, because
wow.
he
Wow.
didn't, I guess he wasn't tainted from other experiences or anything. And he started to realize when employees started to coming to him,
Yeah.
employee after employee after employee, saying, "Thank you so much for building what you have built." And he was like, "Really, this is different than," and
Yeah.
they would go, "Oh yeah, this is like no place I have ever worked." So I love those
Wow.
inspiring
Wow.
leaders.
Wow. It's so
Mm,
interesting too, because as I hear you saying that, it almost feels like there's a level of humility, right? It's just like, oh, this is
totally.
who I am. This is how I show up. And
Yeah.
so beautiful. And did you find like with some of those mentors? Because I think it's also amazing to see like with those mentors, I imagine part of it would be like a sense of generosity. Like
Totally.
how did they show up that you felt like those behaviors that you would want others to continue to emulate?
Well, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Generosity, perhaps first and foremost, generous with their time, generous and compassionate with their advice. I think really good listeners, and humble. And you mentioned that earlier.
Hmm
Just this sense
hmm
of humility, even though they had gained this incredible amount of success, they were so humble, honest, vulnerable to talk about their
Yeah.
mistakes, their journey, but just so generous.
Mm. So, so awesome. I feel like we could continue to talk forever, Michael.
We could just
I
go on
just
all
love
day,
this
I'm sure.
conversation. But I always like to give my guests an opportunity to leave a final thought, whatever is showing up for you in this moment as a final thought.
Well, my final thought again is just to remind you that we do not create fabulous workplaces in a 1 or 2 or 10 times a year event, right? It's not about that. It is literally the small moments, day in and day out, those small moments that you do consistently that will make a difference in your own life for sure, and in the lives of the people you impact. So I challenge you
Mhm.
again to think about your the wake that you leave behind, and I challenge you to think about the impact that work has we have to remind ourselves, I think, that work goes way beyond a paycheck. It's not just about the money. It affects our mental and physical health, our family lives, our marriages, who we socialize with, our friendships, where you live. It's a
Mhm.
little bit of a time sucker, the single biggest
Yeah.
use of your waking hours in this short journey called life. So I think we all owe it to one another. We owe it to our families. We owe it to our employees, our colleagues, our bosses, our clients and customers. We owe it to our souls to create as positive, as inspiring, and yes, as fun a workplace as
Mm.
possible.
Mm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Michael, where can people learn more about you and the work that you're doing?
My website is mikekerr.com, so they can check me out there. I would invite folks, if you're interested. I do a weekly newsletter, just went out about an hour ago, in fact, called Inspiring Workplaces, talking about all this great stuff we talk about. So please cruise by my website, and I would be happy to connect with anybody.
Mm, love it. Thank you so much for being here today,
Thank
Michael.
you.
Thank
Th-
you.
Thank you for having me.
And for everyone, wherever you are in the world, we're saying good morning, good afternoon, good evening, sending tons of love. Bye-bye.